In Hollywood's golden age, 1930s, 1950s, intimacy coordinators did not exist, contracts heavily favored studios, and powerful executives controlled public narratives. Stars were protected, while co-stars, especially women, had limited leverage or recourse. As a result, many accounts of on-set intimacy or misconduct come from memoirs, private letters, or interviews given decades later. Some stories are well documented, others contested, exaggerated, or reshaped by time, gossip, and the studio system's long history of image management. These factors complicate modern interpretations of classic Hollywood behavior. Marlon Brando became the most famous example of an actor blurring the line between performance and reality. Trained in method acting, he believed genuine emotion required removing artificial barriers between actors, including physical ones. This philosophy reached its most controversial point during Last Tango in Paris, 1972, when co-star Maria Schneider later stated she was not fully informed about certain elements of an intimate scene. While Brando argued he was pursuing authenticity, the incident sparked lasting ethical debates about consent, power imbalance, and artistic responsibility. Although Last Tango in Paris falls outside the strict classic Hollywood era, Brando's influence reshaped acting norms that began earlier with films like A Streetcar Named Desire. Unlike many rumors surrounding Golden Age stars, Brando's boundary pushing is well documented through interviews, on-set accounts, and later reflections. Today, his legacy is viewed as both revolutionary for acting realism and cautionary for how unchecked artistic freedom can cause harm. Clark Gable's image as Hollywood's definitive leading man was carefully manufactured by MGM, masking a far more troubling behind-the-scenes reality. Several actresses later alleged that Gable crossed physical boundaries during romantic scenes, taking liberties that went beyond scripted action. One of the most cited accounts came decades later from Loretta Young, who said she became pregnant after an encounter with Gable during the filming of The Call of the Wild, 1935, an incident she described as non-consensual and private statements revealed after her death. At the time, MGM's immense power ensured silence, contracts discouraged complaints, careers could be ended overnight, and studio publicists tightly controlled press narratives. Gable's immense box office value meant accusations were buried rather than addressed. While some details remain disputed and lack contemporaneous documentation, the consistency of later testimonies highlights how power imbalances shaped on-set behavior. Today, historians reassess Gable's legacy through a modern lens that acknowledges both his cinematic impact and the systemic protections that enabled misconduct to go unchecked. Errol Flynn's off-screen reputation as Hollywood's ultimate rogue closely mirrored the chaos that followed him onto film sets. During the 1930s and 1940s, Flynn cultivated an image of reckless charm, heavy drinking, and sexual excess that studios both promoted and struggled to contain. He was accused in multiple high-profile scandals, most notably a 1942 statutory rape trial involving two teenage girls. Flynn was acquitted, but the case severely damaged his reputation among colleagues. Several co-stars and crew members later described his behavior as intrusive, unpredictable, and dismissive of boundaries, particularly during romantic scenes. While there is limited direct evidence that Flynn explicitly demanded real intimacy on set, his casual attitude toward consent and professionalism created environments where discomfort was normalized. Studio executives often intervened to shield him from consequences due to his box office appeal. Today, historians view Flynn as a clear example of how celebrity, indulgence, and weak accountability structures allowed troubling behavior to persist unchecked in classic Hollywood. James Dean's reputation as an intensely emotional, boundary-pushing actor has often been exaggerated into myths that don't align with documented reality. Trained at the actor's studio, Dean embraced method acting techniques that emphasized vulnerability, emotional closeness, and psychological immersion rather than physical transgression. On sets like East of Eden and Rebel Without a Cause, co-stars described him as unpredictable and deeply internal, sometimes frustrating directors but not predatory or coercive. There is no credible evidence that Dean demanded real sexual intimacy during filming, nor are there substantiated accusations from co-stars suggesting such behavior. Much of the confusion stems from his brooding screen presence. unconventional masculinity, and openly fluid social life, which later biographers sensationalized after his early death. Studio publicity and fan culture quickly transformed Dean into a mythic figure, blurring fact and fantasy. Modern historians generally agree that while Dean pushed emotional boundaries in performance, he did not cross ethical lines regarding consent or physical intimacy, making his inclusion in such narratives largely a product of posthumous legend rather than evidence. Richard Burton's on-screen intensity was deeply intertwined with his real-life romance with Elizabeth Taylor, making him one of the clearest examples of personal and professional boundaries overlapping in classic Hollywood. The two met while filming Cleopatra, 1963, and their affair, both married at the time, became one of the most publicized scandals of the era. Unlike many other cases from Hollywood's golden age, the intimacy between Burton and Taylor was openly mutual, passionate, and sustained over years, including 2 marriages to each other. Their films together, such as Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, drew power from their real emotional volatility, arguments, and affection. While this dynamic undeniably heightened realism, it also created emotionally charged sets that could be difficult for directors and crew. Importantly, there is no evidence that Burton coerced co-stars or demanded non-consensual intimacy. Instead, his case illustrates how consent does not automatically equal professionalism. Burton and Taylor willingly blurred lines, showing how mutual desire and star power could still complicate working environments without crossing into exploitation. Frank Sinatra's influence in mid-century Hollywood rarely took the form of explicit on-set demands, but his power was nonetheless significant. By the 1940s and 1950s, Sinatra was not only a major box office draw but also socially connected to studio executives, producers, and powerful off-screen networks. Co-stars and biographers have noted that his presence could shape casting decisions, script revisions, and the overall atmosphere on set. Rather than pushing for literal real intimacy, Sinatra was known to exert pressure indirectly, through charm, intimidation, or social leverage, making it difficult for less powerful actors to refuse his preferences. Romantic relationships with co-stars were common. Though accounts generally describe them as consensual, if complicated by imbalance and career pressure. Studios often accommodated Sinatra to avoid conflict or delays, reinforcing his authority. Historians view Sinatra as emblematic of how classic Hollywood power operated subtly, influence mattered more than overt misconduct, and control was exercised through reputation, access, and fear of professional consequences rather than direct coercion. Mickey Rooney's wholesome, all-American screen persona stood in stark contrast to accounts that emerged later in his life and after his death. As one of MGM's biggest child stars, Rooney grew up inside a studio system that rewarded entitlement and excused excess. In interviews and autobiographical writings, he openly acknowledged compulsive womanizing and behavior he later described as inappropriate and harmful, particularly toward young women drawn to Hollywood's power structures. Several former wives also accused him of emotional and physical abuse, reinforcing a pattern of controlling and exploitative conduct off-screen. While there is limited evidence that Rooney explicitly demanded real intimacy during film scenes, his admissions and repeated accusations reveal how fame and early stardom distorted his sense of boundaries. Studios continued to market him as America's ideal boy next door well into adulthood, suppressing damaging narratives. Today, historians view Rooney as a cautionary example of how the studio system protected profitable stars while ignoring personal misconduct, especially when it conflicted with carefully crafted public images. Paul Newman is often incorrectly included in discussions about classic Hollywood actors who supposedly demanded real intimacy, largely because of his extraordinary on-screen chemistry and enduring status as a sex symbol. In reality, there is no credible evidence, from co-stars, biographers, or studio records, that Newman ever pressured colleagues for physical intimacy or crossed professional boundaries on set. On the contrary, Newman was widely described as respectful, self-aware, and unusually grounded for a star of his magnitude. Much of the rumor stems from the emotional realism he brought to romantic roles in films like Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, The Long, Hot Summer, and HUD. His performances conveyed vulnerability and erotic tension that felt strikingly modern, leading some audiences and later commentators to conflate intensity with impropriety. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Newman maintained a famously devoted marriage to Joanne Woodward, with whom he worked frequently. Their collaborations were marked by mutual trust and admiration, and Woodward herself consistently described Newman as principled and considerate in both personal and professional settings. Biographers note that Newman was openly uncomfortable with Hollywood's excesses and power games. He avoided studio politics, resisted manufactured scandals, and later used his influence for philanthropy rather than personal indulgence. Importantly, no co-star ever accused him of coercion, boundary violations, or exploitative behavior, an absence that is notable given how many Golden Age stories eventually surfaced. Historians now view Newman's inclusion in such narratives as a byproduct of hindsight and stereotype, intense chemistry mistaken for misconduct. His legacy stands as a reminder that sexual magnetism on screen does not automatically reflect unethical behavior behind the camera. Warren Beatty has long carried a reputation as one of classic Hollywood's most notorious ladies' men, largely due to his charisma, on-screen magnetism, and widely publicized romantic entanglements. During the 1960s and 1970s, Beatty starred in numerous films that required romantic or intimate scenes, including Bonnie and Clyde, Shampoo, and Heaven Can Wait, and his charm often translated into off-screen relationships with co-stars. Unlike some actors of the Golden Age whose behavior crossed ethical lines, all accounts of Beatty's interactions describe consensual relationships, albeit often with a significant imbalance of power because he was an established star and producer. Biographers and colleagues note that while he actively pursued romance, he did not coerce or pressure co-stars into sexual activity for the sake of authenticity on set. His reputation as a ladies' man often conflates promiscuity with impropriety, a common misperception about male stars of the era. Beatty's behavior reflects broader dynamics of Hollywood in which male stars enjoyed immense freedom and social leverage, yet, in his case, historical evidence suggests he maintained consent and mutual attraction rather than exploitation. Today, Warren Beatty's legacy illustrates how charisma, romantic pursuits, and celebrity mythmaking can exaggerate perceptions of misconduct, showing that fame alone does not equal coercion or abuse. Burt Lancaster was widely recognized for his athleticism, commanding presence, and dedication to realism, which extended to his approach to intimate and romantic scenes on screen. Trained as a circus acrobat before entering Hollywood, Lancaster brought extraordinary physical discipline and authenticity to his roles, often performing demanding stunts himself. This commitment to realism naturally extended to scenes of physical or romantic closeness, as he believed that genuine emotion and movement could only be captured if the actors fully engaged with each other. Unlike some contemporaries, however, Lancaster remained professional and respectful toward his co-stars. Accounts from directors, co-stars, and crew describe him as collaborative, ensuring that any intimate or physical scenes were clearly choreographed, consensual, and safe. He often worked closely with costume designers and stunt coordinators to make such sequences appear natural without compromising anyone's comfort. Lancaster's insistence on authenticity enhanced the believability of films like From Here to Eternity and Elmer Gantry, while his respectful approach preserved professional boundaries. Historians today view him as a prime example of how an actor could push for realism and intensity on screen without crossing ethical lines, showing that dedication to craft does not require exploitation. John Barrymore, often called the Great Profile and celebrated as one of the finest Shakespearean actors of his generation, exemplifies the complicated mixture of genius and excess that characterized much of classic Hollywood. Barrymore's reputation as a brilliant yet volatile performer was well established by the 1920s and 1930s, both on stage and in film. While he was capable of extraordinary emotional depth and charisma, his off-screen behavior frequently created tense or unpredictable working conditions. Chronic alcohol abuse, erratic moods, and inconsistent professionalism meant that co-stars and crew sometimes had to navigate his unpredictability during rehearsals and on set. Unlike some actors who actively demanded real intimacy from co-stars, Barrymore's demands were often indirect. His instability could create situations where scenes became uncomfortable or improvisational, but there is no documented evidence of coercion or deliberate exploitation. Studios tolerated or managed his behavior because of his immense talent and box office appeal, highlighting how power and celebrity could shield disruptive conduct. While Barrymore's lifestyle sometimes blurred personal and professional lines, modern historians emphasize that the discomfort he caused was usually a byproduct of his dysfunction rather than intentional manipulation. His career serves as a cautionary tale about how addiction and personality issues can impact working environments, illustrating that not all Golden Age on-set drama was the result of malice. Sometimes it was simply human imperfection amplified by fame. Barrymore's legacy endures as a reminder that artistic brilliance and personal instability often coexisted in classic Hollywood, shaping both his performances and the working conditions around him.